Tonight we've got Massey Leonard, who gave us a great talk about French Polynesia. It's nearly a year ago, Ellen,
Yeah, I think it is.
which seems extraordinary, but fantastic photographs and fantastic videos of French Polynesia, and I think we're probably going to get even better ones of Alaska, because I think she spent more time cruising in Alaska than she has in the Pacific, or that part of the Pacific. So Ellen is broadcasting live from Hawaii, which is where she's based, but she's shortly heading back up to Alaska because she can't find anywhere to haul her boat in Hawaii. Seems an awfully long way to go just to haul your boat, but we are a strange breed, these sailing people. But there we go. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you in Hawaii. Ellen, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's fun to be back. So for this talk, I thought I would start with a little overview of Alaska's geography and history, sort of before turning to the sailing and cruising there. Alaska, as we all know, is one of the two United States that are separated from the continental states. So what Alaskans call the lower 48. The other one, of course, is out here in Hawaii. Alaska has 1.7 million square kilometers of land area, which makes it by far the largest state in the US. It's bigger even than the next three largest states combined, Texas, California, and Montana. So here's a picture of Denali National Park in the center of Alaska. Gives you a kind of a nice sense of like that scale of land. That's me down there in the lower right. So while that's a huge area, Alaska looks even bigger than that on a map because of course we use the Mercator projection. So I found these overlays from an Alaska magazine to give you a good sense of Alaska's scale. So there it is overlaid on the lower 48. And here it is over Greenland and over Western Europe.
Wow.
And then I also found an overlay on Australia. So Alaska's land borders are with British Columbia and mostly the Yukon territory of Canada, and the rest of the state is bordered by ocean. Well, of course, any measurement of coastline is necessarily dependent on how precisely you measure a coastline. I mean, you could make it infinite. Alaska has about 55,000 kilometers of shoreline, so that's an awful lot to cover in a sailing boat that goes about 6 or 7 knots. Alaska is also the most sparsely populated state in the US with only 750,000 people. About 65% of Alaska is public land managed by the federal government as national parks, forests, and wildlife refuges. And that doesn't even count state land. So there's a really phenomenal amount of true wilderness. And that's home to a lot of wildlife like this moose here in Denali National Park. Alaska's human history goes back to the Bering Land Bridge, by which people crossed into North America from Siberia about 20,000 or 15,000 years ago. And there's still mammoths roaming around up there. You can still sometimes find mammoth ivory in the sand up in the North Slope. Point Hope, north of the Bering Strait, claims to be the longest continuously inhabited village in North America. Today it's populated by Inupiat people who are sort of cousins of the Inuit in Canada. So there are several main groups of Alaska natives today, the Inupiat and Yupik in the Arctic. This is taken outside of Barrow, Alaska, the North Slope. The Aleutian Islands, that's the town of Dutch Harbor on Alaska. The Athabaskan people of Central Alaska. Here's a photo of the central coast of Alaska in the Kenai Fjords. And then the southeastern coastal people who include the Tlingit and the Haida, who are also the native people of coastal British Columbia. So the cultures of all these people are really diverse. They're widely dispersed geographically, of course, and the topography of Alaska presents formidable obstacles to moving around. So of course, each culture is adapted to the conditions of their home. What works in the coastal temperate rainforest regions of the southeastern coast obviously won't work for the tundra of the high Arctic. The name Alaska comes from the Aleut word, which figuratively means the mainland or the Great Land, and that's why the Great Land is a nickname for Alaska. But literally means the place towards which the action of the sea is directed. So the prevailing winds are westerly in this part of the world. So of course, that makes sense that the Aleuts and the Aleutian Islands would use that word for the mainland of Alaska. European history in Alaska began with Russian exploration in 1741 with the expedition that carried Bering. Russian fur traders began sailing to the Aleutian Islands as early as 1743, only 2 years after Bering. And by the 19th century, the Russians had established permanent settlements and trading posts and had pretty much enslaved the indigenous people. They didn't hunt for the otter, the valuable otter furs and fur seals themselves. They enslaved the native people to do it for them. The period of Russian colonization was pretty brutal for these people, as well as slavery. About 80% of the Aleut people were killed or died of European diseases within the first 2 generations of Russian contact. So it's not a not a pretty time in Alaska's history. The Russians, however, were never able to conquer the Tlingit people. Who waged war against them well into the 1850s. So despite the devastation to the indigenous people and to the wildlife, especially to otters and the fur seals, the Russian colony was never successful for the Russians. It was never profitable, mostly because of the cost of transportation over these long distances that the traders had to cover to get back to Russia and the market for the furs. So in 1867, Russia offered Alaska to the United States for $7.2 million. That's what's known as Seward's Folly, because at the time, the Americans didn't see any value in Alaska. They just thought of it as this frozen Northland. And it passed through a couple of administrative iterations before it became an official territory in 1912, and then finally became a state in January 1959. As the 49th state, Hawaii became a state in August of 1959. Alaska's economy today is a mix of fishing, got very well managed fisheries up there, oil, of course, Prudhoe Bay in the North Slope, and defense and tourism. These boats here are the famous king crab fishing boats in Alaska and Dutch Harbor from that TV show that some people know, Deadliest Catch. So let's turn to visiting Alaska by sailboat. While some of the best of Alaska's coast is the part known as the Inside Passage in the southeastern Panhandle. Beyond those islands and channels, Alaska is a bit of a high latitude region. You can encounter quite challenging conditions, so it's best to be prepared for that. Depending on where you go, you can encounter severe gales. This picture was taken in the Chukchi Sea, north of the Arctic Circle, in the fall. Well, it's really in August, but that's almost already fall up there. You can get gales throughout the state, though. I think this is in the strait between Kodiak and the Alaska Peninsula in like July or August. So it's best to have a well-found vessel that you feel can handle tougher conditions and to make sure she's in good condition before you go. This talk is obviously not about high latitude preparation. So suffice it to say that it's just best to prepare yourself and your boat as you would for any voyage in high latitude regions. Things like storm sails, a drogue or a sea anchor, good set of anchors, radar for the fog. You can get quite a bit of fog, particularly out in the Aleutian Islands. It's prevalent out there because of the cold water of the Bering Sea meeting the relatively warmer air of the So yeah, so it's good to be prepared for that. If you go way up north on the Arctic coast in the Northwest Passage, you're bound to run into sea ice eventually, which can be very beautiful, but also treacherous, particularly when it's windy. So you have to have a way to obtain sea ice charts. You'll want to have a reliable way to access that, and a reliable way to access weather forecasts, even if you don't intend to go anywhere close to the sea ice. Our boat does not have a pilot house, with just a spray hood here, as you can see, which I think it would be much better to have a pilot house or some kind of harder spray hood. After 5 seasons up there, I really think that would be a real asset. It can be pretty cold standing watch in the open like this. And it would also, even down in the inside passage, it could make a real difference because it gets a lot of rain down there. Temperatures are quite cold too, so it's nice to have a good heater or even a couple. This was taken in the fall in the Bering Sea. It was pretty cold out. We had the heater running, but it was still pretty cold. We have this diesel gravity-fed heater. And we also have a bus heater that runs off our engine when we're motoring. They're great to have to dry the cabin out, like I mentioned, and not just for the cold. So in the inside passage, I think it's important to have a heater, even if that's all you're doing. The tidal range in Alaska is pretty big, which creates strong currents in the narrow straits between the islands. So it's important to be careful with the timing of your passages and, of course, with your coastal navigation. You might think that that isn't really something we have to worry about so much anymore with chart plotters. But this fishing boat is not an old wreck. This was wrecked on these rocks sometime in the winter, spring of 2017. So this ship was wrecked well before chart plotters in 1965. But it was also wrecked because of strong currents that washed her into this bay. This is on Unimak Island in the Aleutians. That's a 460 some foot ship. So now for the good news. There can also be a surprising amount of gorgeous weather in Alaska in the summer, cloudless, beautiful days like this here on Kodiak Island. Seth and I spent 5 seasons up there, if you count our first year in British Columbia. So 4 in Alaska and the first one in BC. Is when we purchased our boat in 2013, we did a cruise of the inside passage up British Columbia before we had refit the boat in any way. So she had no electronics. And so we were doing all our navigation the old fashioned way, which was a lot of fun. The next year, after we'd outfitted her, we made a much bigger trip all the way out to the Aleutian Islands, where we wintered Celeste. And that's the white line on this map here. And then we sailed up to Port Barrow on the Beaufort Sea and back to all the Aleutians to winterize Celeste again, which is the yellow line. And so she sustained some pretty severe damage that winter in Dutch Harbor from a big storm it was a typhoon in Japan, and the winds were still pretty circular and strong when they hit Dutch Harbor. It was severe enough to blow the roofs off a few houses and stuff like that. So after repairing what we could in the Aleutians and repairing the absolutely essential things like a bent chain plate, we sailed back to Washington State, and that's the black line there, to haul out and do more major repairs, especially replacing the standing rigging. So then the following year, we made one more out and back trip to Kodiak Island. But rather than organizing this chronologically, I thought it would actually sort of make more sense to divide the rest of the talk up by regions, starting way up in the far north and then working south and then back east. So we'll start way up north at Port Barrow, which is the northernmost point of the United States at 71 degrees, 23 minutes north. It does not have a good anchorage. You have this little spit of sand, gravel that you basically move around to stay protected from whichever direction the wind is coming from. It's quite shallow, So when the wind gets up, you can be anchored far enough out that there's quite a lot of fetch, which is not that pleasant. And of course, it's cold and has volatile weather with low pressure systems converging from the south up the Chukchi Sea and from Wrangel Island north of Siberia in the east. It's a great place to sail, highly recommended. But we also got lucky with some gorgeous calm weather while we were there. And of course, the light in the Arctic is just beautiful with the 24-hour daylight and the low angle of the sun, which makes for beautiful light. As people who've sailed up in the Arctic know, you get these strange superior mirages from the cold, which is kind of a fun thing to see. And we were lucky to get calm weather for navigating the brash ice. Even it was dead calm, so even enough to take photographs of the boat, under over photographs with the boat in ice. We had a lot of fun meeting the people who live there. Seth is rowing one couple out to dinner here on our boat. They brought some bowhead whale muktuk with them, which is kind of an experience. I'm not sure. I don't think I would eat it anywhere else, but anyway, it was fun. One man we met has the last remaining dog team in Barrow, sled dog team. And he took us out to show us how they exercise the dogs in summer to keep them in shape. They tow a four-wheeler in neutral behind them there across the tundra. And this picture gives a pretty good idea of what the landscape is like up there. It's flat tundra. About 20 miles southeast of Barrow, heading east in the Northwest Passage, there's a little barrier island called Cooper Island, where a seabird researcher named George DeVokie has been studying black guillemots for over 40 years. We sailed over to visit him, and he told us all about the birds and their nesting habits and fishing habits and the effects of climate change on them, that they're finding it harder and harder to get the fish that they would normally feed their young, and having to find different fish. One of our favorite things about the Arctic was the abundance of these beautiful birds. This is a light morph northern fulmar, which is a circumpolar bird. So many birds nest on the Arctic tundra in the summer and then mass up to migrate south in the fall. They were all massing up about when we were there. This is a Pacific white-fronted goose. And here's a king eider. He's molting into his winter plumage. Told us it's time to get going back south. On the way north, we'd had a few days of really beautiful weather. This shot was taken around, I think, 1 or 2 in the morning, down in the Bering Sea, just below Nome. And here's Cape Lisburne, north of Point Hope in the Chukchi Sea, another beautiful calm day. All those little black dots, I don't know if you can see them, but there's all these little black dots that are every single one of those is a thick-billed murre that all nest in those cliffs there. Here's a close-up of one of those guys. One of the things I love about the Arctic is that even though it looks so barren, you have tremendous amounts of life in places like this. On our way south in August and September, though, we had gales almost the whole way, but it was fine. I mean, the boat handled it fine. And then, so here's Point Hope. So coming a bit further south, we actually only stopped on our way north. But as I said, it's the longest, or it claims to be the longest continuously inhabited village in North America. The people here still lead a fairly traditional life, including hunting bowhead whales every spring from their umiaks. Those bones in the foreground there are all bowhead whale bones. This house here is also made out of bowhead whale bones. Up until the 1970s, some people actually still lived in these traditional whalebone and sod dwellings. On this one here that I'm taking the picture out of, even had an electrical outlet installed in it. It's kind of funny. But really, people lead a pretty modern life there today. I mean, you know, they all live in modern houses with heating, and everything, and get around with four-wheelers and snow machines. There's a lot of beautiful bird life on Point Hope too, including this gorgeous snowy owl here, resting on the top of a frame of an umiak, hunting for ground squirrels in the tundra. South of Point Hope, you cross the Arctic Circle and then you go through the Bering Strait, which is often a pretty unpleasant body of water where we found at least that 30 knots of wind doesn't disperse the fog. But then you get to civilization in the form of Nome, Alaska, where the gold rush town that's still digging for gold today. Now the gold is mostly all underwater. They seem to have found all the gold on land. So the miners dive for it from these dredger boats here out in the Bering Sea. Outside of town, though, it's still pretty much empty tundra where this herd of muskoxen lives. Here's a muskox. And more lovely birds nesting there, like this merganser with their newly hatched chicks. And Arctic terns. Arctic terns are the bird that has the longest migration path of any bird. They go all the way from the Arctic to the Antarctic every year. South of Nome, you're into the Bering Sea. This here is St. Lawrence Island with a flock of short-tailed shearwaters. Short-tailed shearwaters are another bird with a really long migration path all the way to Tasmania and back. But one of the best places for bird watching in the whole area are the Pribilof Islands, where there are lots of unique and comic birds, like this little guy here, that nest in the sea cliffs. He's a crested auklet. Here's a better picture. You can see his crest a little bit better there. There's a bunch of different auklets that nest in these cliffs. This guy's a least auklet. He's only 6 inches tall. And parakeet auklets. And there are quite a few puffins too. This guy here is a tufted puffin. Getting these photos means craning out over these cliffs that are pretty dropped vertically to the ocean. And the Pribilofs are, you know, interesting enough to bird nerds that you're willing to go for it. So one reason that bird nerds like to come here is that you see so many species that are unique to this region. Like many of these auklets are hard to spot in other places. And this guy is a red-faced cormorant who's unique to the region as well. And red-legged kittiwakes, I think only breed on the Pribilofs. So that's, again, a unique bird that people come to see. And there's mammal life too. The Pribilofs are home to about 70% of the northern fur seal population, which were hunted aggressively, as I mentioned, for their fur by the Russians. But they've made a relatively good comeback. And they're fun to watch. They're really territorial and constantly getting in fights and skirmishes over their territory and their females. And there are blue morph Arctic foxes on the Pribilofs. They're not introduced, so they're not actually a threat to the birds. I mean, they are a threat to the birds, but they're a natural threat to the birds. They're not an invasive species. And this one is molting out of his winter coat. We took this picture in early July on our way north. There are some people who live on the Pribilofs. They're the descendants of the slaves that the Russians brought there for the fur seal trade. They're all Aleut natives. But before the Russians brought people there, the Pribilofs were actually uninhabited. So this is obviously the 4th of July parade. So that brings us down south to the Aleutians. The trip from the Pribilofs to the Aleutians is pretty short, only about 3 or 4 days. I think 2 or 3 days. And there's good birding to be had on that passage too, like this fork-tailed storm petrel. And you start to see albatrosses. This is a Laysan albatross. They They nest down here in Hawaii in the northwest chain, and then fly up to Alaska in the summer. And here's landfall on Unalaska Island, that's big glaciated mountains. The Aleutians are a chain of volcanic islands that run from the Alaska mainland in a big arc towards Siberia. Mount Shishaldin here is one of the tallest, nearly 10,000 feet, about 3,000 meters. So like many of the volcanoes, it's still active and smoking away. In our time in Alaska, a volcano further to the west, Boguslav, erupted the huge plume of ash and smoke up to something like 30,000 feet. So they're still very active. And the Aleutians can get a lot of fog and also wild weather. I mean, they're known for their fall and winter storms, but it can get rough and windy in the summer too. But I think they're really beautiful. It's definitely worth it. And they're all tundra islands. It's too cold and windy for trees to really get a foothold. But I think the tundra is really beautiful here. It's so bright green in the summer, and in the spring, you get a lot of these beautiful wildflowers like these wild iris. The tundra and the peaks and ridges make for fantastic walking too. There aren't really any official trails, but as long as you get a permit from the Aleut Corporation, you can have access to the land and kind of hike all over. So that's fun. A number of the islands have towns and villages. The biggest is Dutch Harbor with the deep water port here that exports a tremendous amount of fish, pollock and king crab. Dutch Harbor was bombed during the war, and Attu and Kiska at the far western end of the chain were occupied. A lot of people, that's sort of a forgotten story that happened, but there's a lot of sort of leftover things from the war on Dutch Harbor, gun emplacements and Quonset huts and such. So the king crab fishery here is huge, and the king crab traps themselves are huge. I didn't really quite realize, I hadn't watched the Deadliest Catch show. I mean, I think a lot of people have, but I hadn't actually watched it until I went to the bar in Dutch Harbor. So I didn't know how huge these traps were until I saw them in person. That's me standing next to them, which gives you a good sense of it. Obviously the crabs themselves are big. Here are some crab legs on our grill. That is a full meal and a little more. We also enjoyed the wildlife in the Aleutians, including the many bald eagles that live there. They're obviously attracted to the fish processing plants, but it's fun to see so many of them. Here's some horned puffins. And there's quite a lot of humpback whales in the summer. And Arctic ground squirrels that you'll see all over your hikes. And there's even a fair amount of underwater life. And these starfish and plumose anemones are growing here on the pier or the dock that Celeste was moored to. And tons of kelp everywhere. So heading east, these are the volcanoes of Unimak Island, which is the big island closest to the Alaska mainland. I think that one in the center is Shishaldin. It's just a different year, earlier in the year with a lot more snow. And here we are approaching Pavlov volcano on the mainland near the very tip of the Alaska Peninsula. So it's still tundra here too. So you can get beautiful views on clear days like this. Good hiking, although now that you're on the mainland, you have to be careful about watching out for bears. The mountains and cliffs of the peninsula and then the gaps between them can create like katabatic and funneling winds. So it can get quite rough sailing along the peninsula, and really pays to listen to the weather forecast. so that you have good weather like this, flying the spinnaker under these beautiful mountains, instead of sailing in these snotty low pressure systems. The eastern end of the Alaska Peninsula particularly has these gorgeous sort of more alpine looking mountains with glaciers. And this area is home to a whole lot of bears. This is Katmai National Park, this section of the peninsula. So they congregate around these streams in the late summer to fish for salmon that are running up the streams. Bears are usually solitary and very territorial, but during the salmon run, there's enough food for everybody that they seem to tolerate each other in close proximity. They just sort of ignore each other, and all of them go about fishing. They also seem to ignore the humans taking their photographs, which is good. Here's one pouncing in the stream. I don't think he got his fish. Here's a nice close-up. You see all the mosquitoes buzzing around him too. That's a fact of life there in the summer too. In this picture, you can just make out Celeste there in the top right corner. And here you can see a seaplane behind the two bears. The seaplanes bring tourists to this bay, not every day, but pretty frequently during the salmon run to see the bears. And it's kind of fun because all these old seaplanes they're old de Havilland beavers. The body of water between the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak can be pretty nasty. I mean, there's always pretty strong currents running in it, which can kick up a strong kind of nasty sea. Kodiak Island itself is, of course, home to the Kodiak bear. This guy here is a small juvenile, maybe a couple years old. And here's a mother bear and her cub. Kodiak bears and brown bears that I was just showing pictures of in the Katmai Park and grizzly bears are all genetically the same animal. They're called different things because of their location. So grizzly bears are called grizzly bears in the interior. Brown bears are just the name for the coastal grizzly bear, and Kodiak bear, obviously, the name for brown bears that live on Kodiak Island. But there's really no genetic difference between them. Kodiak's a beautiful island. Again, it's mostly tundra until you get up to the town in the northern part. We did a fair amount of fishing there for salmon, and we're pretty successful enough that we had to can our catch because we couldn't eat it all and we don't have a freezer on our boat. So we would smoke it first and then preserve it in our pressure canner. That was fun. We actually were still eating it on our passage down to French Polynesia a year later. So heading north and east from Kodiak, we come to the Kenai Peninsula and Prince William Sound. It's one of the most spectacular regions with the highest mountains, deep fjords and glaciers, and humpback whales. It's fun. I love the humpbacks every time they come around the boat. It's a challenge to catch them at the right moment when they're leaping out of the water like this, but it's fun. This is in Prince William Sound. Gives you also a kind of nice sense of the mountain scenery there. Area is known for its seals, which haul out on the ice flows from the glaciers. And of course, it's otters, which can sometimes do the same thing. And of course, the glaciers themselves, which when we were there were still mostly tidewater glaciers. It's been a few years since we were there, so it'll be interesting to see when we go back how badly they receded. This one here is Columbia Glacier. And this picture was taken in 2014, so almost 5 years ago now. And as I was saying before I started the talk, that glacier, I saw a picture of it from, I think, 2019 or 2018, and it had already receded so far that it was almost not tidewater at all anymore. So it's kind of sad. Most sailors, of course, will view the tidewater glaciers from their boats, from the sea, which is fun. But it's also possible to hike up to the ice field that feeds all these tidewater glaciers. So this picture is taken from standing on Harding Ice Field, looking down one of the glaciers. Like I said, the central coastal region just has beautiful mountain scenery. And you're back in forested areas now, which is kind of fun after being in the tundra for so long, to see these trees and forests. More mountain scenery. This is about 60 degrees north, so the Aleutians are further south, so when you come up into the Prince William Sound, you're coming north again. Waterfalls. And beautiful little anchorages that are sometimes so snug and tight that it pays to stern tie. Good fishing there, of course, too. There's dinner. Nice big pig salmon. Although the bears think that the fishing is pretty good too. This guy here, he was, I wouldn't say he was aggressive. He was just extremely curious about us being there and us fishing and our camera gear. We had to sort of back away while he explored our camera. So it's not a bad idea to carry some way to defend yourself, and of course know how to use it properly. To get out here to Prince William Sound from the Inside Passage, from Puget Sound and Glacier Bay, requires crossing the Gulf of Alaska, which is not a huge body of water. It's only about a 4-day trip, 4.5. But it can get a bit exciting with gales and such. But if you time it right, it can be this beautiful passage, watching the birds, like this black-footed albatross. There are also a few places you can stop along the way if you sort of hug the coast instead of going straight across the Gulf. But obviously that lengthens the mileage. And also these bays, these inlets, you can kind of get stuck in them because the low pressure systems will sort of pile up on them. On this one here, we were stuck in for 2 weeks before we saw this view at all. It was just pelting rain and windy all that time. And then it finally cleared and we got this amazing view of these 18,000 foot peaks here. That's the St. Elias Range. So I think Southeast Alaska and the Inside Passage is actually one of the most beautiful regions to sail. I mean, it's also one of the most well-known and probably has the most boats, although there really aren't that many. But I think it's just beautiful. I think it has everything. I mean, it has these more glaciers with mountains. I mean, that's a picture looking across at Glacier Bay. It has lovely, snug little coves. We found a number of anchorages where we were the only boat. Has great hiking on actually real trails that are maintained by the Forest Service. And then beautiful lakes at the end of these trails. That boat that I'm rowing on this lake here is just left there by the Forest Service crew that maintained the trail. It's kind of fun. Good fishing in the Southeast as well. Here, Seth's got a coho salmon, silver salmon. It's one of the latest, one of the species that runs up the rivers late in the summer. And there's quite a few nice little towns, really friendly people, pretty good amenities. So that's kind of adds to it. I mean, it makes it feel a little less wildernessy, but it's also, I don't know, I think it's fun. And then huge waterfalls. So if you need some wilderness, you can find it pretty easily. The bear in this picture gives this waterfall some scale, of course. The sailing here can be really nice in these inland channels protected from the ocean swell. It can anchor almost every night. And sailing in nearshore waters is obviously scenic. I mean, you're always looking at something. But in other ways, it's challenging because you need to be constantly aware of hazards, rocks and currents. This little winding waterway here is called Rocky Pass. I can't recall off the top of my head how fast the currents run here, but I do remember that in some straits we transited, you can get currents of 12 or even 14 knots. So it's faster than most sailboats can go. So, you know, you need to pay attention and time it at slack water. So that's because of these big tides, of course. And yeah, need to pay attention and not mess up like we did here. The rewards, of course, are tremendous. Tons of humpback whales, just seemingly as many as up in Prince William Sound. There's a couple places where they congregate in the southeast Inside Passage. They come up here, of course, to feed in the winter. I mean, in the summer. They come to Hawaii to breed in the summer, winter. Anyway, so they feed by sort of cooperating by bubble net feeding together. A group of them will corral the herring or the krill by sending out bubbles in this sort of big circle around them, and then the whales will come up together with their mouths open like this to scoop it all up. So that's really something to watch. Dall's porpoises are fairly common too. They're really fast though, and often get bored riding your bow wave because they can swim so much faster. And then sometimes you'll see orcas and killer whales. These big sea lions here seem to be on all the navigation markers almost, barking away, kind of smelling bad. And of course, there's more bears. This guy's a brown bear. So like I said, is the same as a grizzly bear, but living on the coast. He's fishing for salmon. Here he is again. Here's a brown bear that got a salmon. And then there are black bears as well. This guy had some good success. And bear families. It's always fun to see the little cubs. Of course, you don't want to ever get between the mother and the cubs. Not a good place to be. So I thought I would finish with a little addendum about British Columbia because it's, you know, if you're going to do the Inside Passage of Alaska, like presumably you would want to do the Inside Passage or outside coast of British Columbia, which is just as scenic and in some ways actually more wild, fewer towns and fewer people there. There's a ton to explore, both on the inside route among all the islands that hug the mainland mountains, and on the outside route all along the islands formerly known as the Queen Charlotte's, Haida Gwaii. Here's the Haida Gwaii Islands. There's a ton of wildlife in British Columbia too. This northern section of the BC coast was the only place where we saw wolves up close like this. We saw some wolves in Alaska too, but they were very far away and ran off before we could get a photo. The forests here are lusher than up north. There's cedar branches overhanging the water here. It's just quite a bit more, the temperatures are milder, the seasons are milder. So you get forests, tremendous trees like this cedar growing over this boulder here, these temperate rainforests. Further south, again, you have the choice between the outside route along the west coast of Vancouver Island, which is colder, more exposed, more fog, but where you'll find sort of remote villages that people don't often go to. It's little boardwalks here that serve as the streets. There's more logging, sadly, in British Columbia than in Alaska. You tend to find more wildlife on the west coast of Vancouver Island than inside, like this little otter and black bears. Black bear mother and cubs. They have that little white patch sometimes on their chest. Again, they look cute, but best not to go touch. On the inside route between Vancouver Island and the mainland, if you choose to go that route, you end up going through the beautiful, famous Desolation Sound, which is just a beautiful body of water. And where you find inlets like these, there's a waterfall, a lake up above, waterfall. A lot of the islands have bays with narrow entrances to get into the coves. Snug anchorages, surprisingly deserted anchorages. More lush forests with big trees. And the water in Desolation Sound can actually get warm enough to swim in the summer. I think because the tides sort of converge there. And I'm not quite sure why, but there's some reason why it's actually warmer inside Vancouver Islands than it is in Puget Sound, or certainly than north of there. So you can actually, snorkel and look at the big starfish and anemones. And Seth here has turned our stern line into a zip line, with a little snatch block. The season is much longer. Summer lasts longer down there. These blackberries here were still producing well into September. So it's milder. It's nice sailing. And there are a few towns and villages down there, all sort of have their own character, tend to have pretty friendly people. So that sort of adds to the experience. So basically, you can't go wrong in any of these regions. I think it makes for fabulous sailing anywhere you go. So I have a little video if that is of interest and if we have time for it. Otherwise, we can just turn to questions. What do you think, Simon?
I think we need the video, Alan. The photography so far is just unbelievable. So we're very anxious to see the video, please.
Okay. So I think I have to, let's see, I think I have to go to make the share my computer sound to do that. I'll do that. And go to the video.
Yellow warning for Monday. Tonight, east wind 25 knots becoming southeast 35 knots after midnight. Seas 14 feet. Areas of fog, rain. Monday, southeast wind 35 knots. Seas 14 feet. Areas of fog, rain.
We just crossed the Arctic Circle.
Helen, that was fantastic. That was fantastic.
Oh, good, yeah. So I guess any questions? I don't know.
Alan, do you want to unshare your screen so we get rid of the echo that has re-emerged?
Yeah.
Then we'll get your photo back on the
Yeah.
on screen. That's perfect.
There we go.
Fantastic. Well, that was absolutely wonderful. There's a couple of questions from Chad and Carolyn, and I've asked them to open their microphone rather than me read them out. So, Chad and Carolyn, do you want to go ahead?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, great. We are currently in Petersburg, Alaska. We've been here since August, and we've been sailing throughout the southeast of Alaska. And we are wondering, how far north do you think we should go? Is it worth it, the weather way up there, to go up there? And also looking at another location to winter next year, and wondering if there's a place that you recommend, maybe that has the aurora borealis on a regular basis.
Gosh. So the only place that I saw the Northern Lights was on the Alaska Peninsula. No, that's not true at all. Oh my God, I saw the Northern Lights even better just north of Ketchikan, just when we were leaving Ketchikan.
Interesting.
So yeah, so I mean, I kind of think you'll probably see them. I mean, I don't know. And you've been there all winter though, you said. So.
Yeah, it's really bright where we are, and the marina, and it's not quite far south and north enough, I guess. So we were thinking about Juneau, and we were thinking about if we wanted to go even further north.
Yeah, we have some friends who lived in Juneau on their boat for a long time. They don't live there anymore, but yeah, I think Juneau would be probably a good place. They were able to totally outfit their boat there and get it ready for big voyaging, and so I think that would be a really good option.
Yeah, but wintering further north is not ideal, right? Too cold.
Well, I mean, some other friends of ours wintered. I mean, we left our boat in Dutch Harbor. I would not recommend that at all. I mean, the only reason that we were able to do that was because we have good friends who live there, and she used to manage the port. Most people aren't given slips there. Like, it's not, the Port Authority usually tells transients to go away. Those same friends who she managed the port in Dutch Harbor, they wintered their boat one time in Seward because they wanted to be close to Prince William Sound in the spring when the otter babies were being born. But they didn't live on their boat. They hauled it out of the water and they rented an apartment. It's because it gets well below freezing all winter up there. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how far north do you recommend that we sail? Is it worth it? The weather, the storms, up near Anchorage, or further north?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's totally worth it. Yeah. It's definitely worth going to Prince William Sound in that area. I mean, I think that's one of the most beautiful spots, and I mean, it's really not bad. You just pay attention to the weather forecasts, and it's fine, you know.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Any favorite like must-see places?
Oh, I don't know. It's all good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, actually, Petersburg, where you are, we love that area where Frederick Sound is and Baranof Island and that whole region. We love that. I really love Prince William Sound and those glaciers up there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you for the presentation. We enjoyed it.
Yeah. How long are you going to be up there? Another year,
thinking,
it sounds like.
Yeah, another full year. And then we'll head south and enjoy British Columbia, because we did British Columbia during the lockdown. We were the only US boat probably because we were in lockdown. Yeah, we were in lockdown in Vancouver. So they allowed us to be kind of like Canadians and see British Columbia. But of course, everything was closed. You know, we couldn't go on land because of the fear of COVID. So we hope to enjoy that on our way back. Yeah, cool. Well, if we head up there this summer, we'll see if we find you. Yeah, that'd be nice. Yeah, let's do it. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Carolyn. There's a question from Bill Cuffey, and I've asked him to Cuffle. I've asked him to open his microphone. So go ahead, Bill.
Hi there. Actually, this is Mrs. Cuffle speaking.
There you go. Sorry about that. Apologies.
No worries. We share your love and admiration of British Columbia and encourage everybody we meet to go cruise there. But my question for you is, how is your boat insulated from both water and air?
Our boat is wooden. It's about 1.25 inches thick hull of Western red cedar and Honduran mahogany. So wood makes a really good insulator. So we don't actually have any other insulation. You can stick, bubble wrap over the hatches if it gets really bad. That helps a lot. But yeah, she doesn't have any other insulation, but it's surprisingly good. I mean, we didn't have any condensation on the hull until we got sort of into the Bering Sea. And even then it was mostly confined to the bilge. But we dry her out with the heater and everything.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. It's cold. I mean, the air temperature inside the boat was, when we were up in the far north, even with the heater running, was only about 10 degrees Celsius. So it was pretty cold.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
Okay, we'll go next to Jeff Doggett, please. Your microphone's open, go ahead.
Thanks, I hope you can hear me. Absolutely stunning photos, Alan, fantastic. As a wooden boat owner myself as well, what is your boat?
She's cold molded, and she was designed by Francis Kinney, who worked for Sparkman and Stevens for most of his career. He had retired from Sparkman and Stevens and was working independently when he designed our boat. And he designed her for a guy in British Columbia who lived in Victoria, who wanted a like classic looking boat. She was built in 1985, so pretty recent considering what she looks like, but that's why she was a custom thing for a guy who wanted a boat like that.
Thanks. She's very pretty.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely gorgeous. Judith Jacobson, you've wanting to come in.
Hi, Ellen. I really, really enjoyed your talk and your pictures, of course, again. And
Thank you.
I'm just amazed how much it looks like Denmark, Norway.
Yeah.
They're more wild, I think, and you don't see so many bears in Norway. Well, actually, we never saw one. But yeah, I really want to get that way someday. I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I would love to get to Norway someday. So there you go.
Yeah, you should. If one thing I want to ask you, the Arctic fulmars, did they follow the boat?
I'm trying to think. I mean, they seemed curious, like they would come over and look at the boat, but they wouldn't follow us for very long. Not that I
When we
remember
sailed
anyway.
to Svalbard, they would basically follow the boat, and then they would like circle the boat, like looking at us, like that's a strange when you got there, or something like that. They were a really great company. We had so much fun watching them because they were always there once we got out into the Barents Sea. Oh, and by the way, did you know that Bering was Danish?
Oh, I did know that actually. Yeah, because I read a book about the Russian colonization of America, exploration, and so yes, I actually did know that, but I had forgotten. So thanks for reminding me.
No, I just found it interesting. So anyway, thank you very much. If you do get to Norway, you may stop by Denmark sometime. Then definitely look by.
Definitely, yeah, it would be fun to see you again.
It would. Thank you.
So Judith, are the mountains 17,000 feet high in Denmark as well? Or?
Thank you. Well, also we have no volcanoes, isn't that?
Absolutely, yes. It's a nice, safe place to go. Next, thank you, Judith. Question from Martin Fuller.
Hi, it's Stephanie here.
Oh, it's Stephanie. It's always the wrong one. Okay. Hi, Stephanie. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ellen, for the stunning photographs. You're either very bold or you've got a very good zoom lens on your camera. But what I wanted to ask you about was the damage done in the storm at Dutch Harbour. Was it caused by another vessel, or what was the cause of the damage, please?
So there's no way to haul out of the water in Dutch Harbor. So we were tied to a dock and we had a lot of fenders out, but the wind was strong enough that it heeled her over at the dock and caught the tow rail under the dock. And then she was slamming up against the bottom of the dock. And that bent the turnbuckles on the rigging, and it bent one of the chain plates inboard. And it also smashed up the jib track and the tow rail and the jib cars. So that was, and it bent a bunch of the stanchions. That was sort of the extent of it. I mean, the only things that we absolutely had to replace before we set sail were the chain plate that was bent and the bent turnbuckles. The rest of it was, and we had to get a new jib car, but fortunately the track wasn't so damaged that we couldn't get the jib car onto it. And then when we got down to Washington, we could, scarf a whole new piece of wood into that tow rail and repair it and put a new jib track in and replace all the stanchions. And so it wasn't actually, it was considering how bad the storm was and how bad a lot of people had it, their roofs blowing off their houses. And one guy, his whole bathroom got sort of shoved, like a roof from another house hit the side of his house and shoved his toilet like a yard into his house from the bathroom. So, it could have been so much worse than it was. So we were thankful that was all that happened.
Did you overwinter on the boat there, or did you leave the boat unattended?
No, we left the boat with some friends of ours who live in Dutch Harbor. Yeah. So we weren't there when it happened, but fortunately they were in the harbor looking after their own boat as it was happening, so they could nip over and try and shove some more fenders on her.
Simon, it's Martin. Could I just ask one follow-up question?
Yeah,
what
go ahead.
size lenses did you use for most of your photography? Because clearly I saw a large telephoto, but it'd be interesting to know what size lens and what type of camera you were using.
Yeah, so we mostly use a Canon 60 DSLR. We also have a little Canon entry-level DSLR as well. And then the lenses, the big zoom lens is a 400 millimeter zoom. And then we have some more wide angle, smaller lenses as well. The under-over shot is taken obviously with a much wider angle lens with a dome port and underwater housing. But for the bear photography, it was almost all that 400 millimeter zoom. Although actually a lot of them got close enough that we only needed to have it at 100 millimeters. So
Thanks.
I guess all the bears are pretty well fed at that time of year, so they're not too dangerous. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, they're also fairly used to people, and those seaplanes bring in tourists almost every day, and so you sort of line up on the bank of the stream there, and the bears seem to have gotten used to people. I mean, I don't know. It seems like someday something might happen, but
as long as they're catching fish, catching fish, you're all right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Was that Martin Smith who came in last, or Martin Fuller? I'm not too sure. I think Martin Smith is next. Is that right, Martin?
It was Martin Fuller the last time, Simon.
Okay. Martin Smith had a question. He might have already had that one asked, but you're welcome to come in if you want to, Martin. Martin Smith.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Yeah, superb talk. But no, you've already answered the question.
Yeah.
Thanks. It was just about what type of boat it was, but wonderful photography. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Next, we've got Gator Christiansen. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, hi. It's really not a question, but just a kind of frustration exclamation about Alaskan being very far away from Europe. We got to sail all the way around. But thanks a lot for fantastic pictures and a talk and a video. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
There are many comments that you can see, probably, Alan, saying the same thing on there. People are welcome to come in if they want to. I think Bill has already spoken, Bill Cuffle. Barbara Cowpey writes, just to say the beauty of the area and the incredible is incredible, and your photographs and video moved me to tears. Goodness gracious. I think we'll have to bring Barbara in. Let me see if I can find her. You've got to cheer her up quickly. Barbara, do you want to open your microphone and come in? Go ahead, Barbara, if you can hear me. No, not hearing Barbara at the moment, but Charles Stark says the same. Oh, sorry, it's jumping around a bit. Question from Chad and Carolyn again about your forced air heating. Is your heater forced diesel or just a diesel heater and standalone? Any issue with back with downdrafts, I think it means.
Yeah, the heater we use all the time is just the standalone gravity fed diesel heater. It's not a forced air. We have had some issues with it going out and filling the cabin with nasty smells in strong winds. We don't actually use it much when we're sailing because of that problem. But actually we got around it with a really sort of jerry built kind of, we took a 5-gallon bucket and cut the bottom out of it and stuck it around where the chimney comes out of the top of the boat, and that protects it really well from the wind and pretty much solved the problem. It looks really funny, but it worked. So
Alan, there's some pretty distinguished high latitude sailors online at the moment. I'm just asking Andrew Wilkes if he wants to come in. I think I saw Jarlath is online. I'll come to him. Andrew, do you want to open your microphone if you can?
Hi, Simon. I hadn't realised I'd raised my hand, but
I raised it for you.
Just an absolutely stunning talk with fantastic photography. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much indeed. And it brought back many happy memories to Maura and me of our passage through Alaska. I wondered, I think I gathered that, I don't know, Ellen went to Hawaii and back, which seems quite, and I wondered how that worked. It's quite a trip, isn't it?
So we are in Hawaii now, but we went from Alaska to California down to Baja, and then from Baja to French Polynesia. And we've had our boat in French Polynesia for the last 2.5 years. And when the borders opened in the middle of the pandemic in July, we flew down from Hawaii to pick up our boat in French Polynesia and spent 3 months cruising around there, and then sailed up to Hawaii in November. So we've just got up here about 5 months ago now. And so so we're in Hawaii, and we're thinking about, well, we are going to go to Alaska. The question is whether we go this year or next. And so I don't know. So I can't tell you how the passage is going to go because we haven't done it yet up to Alaska. But the one down to French Polynesia was all fine. I mean, it was all, it's all with the wind going down the coast and then across the Pacific. So it was against the wind coming up to Hawaii from Tahiti, though, because we left it too late and the winds had clocked into the northeast, even south of the equator. So we were sort of fighting the wind all the way up to Hawaii from French Polynesia. Yeah. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that was our route.
Thank you very much indeed, and we're full of admiration for you. It's a tremendous cruise you're doing. Could you say a little bit more about the boat? I mean, she's what length is she over?
She's 40 feet overall and 28 feet on the waterline. So she's got that classic overhang thing. She's, like I said, she's cold molded, 3 layers of Western red cedar, and then the final layer of Hunter and mahogany. And then she's actually got just 1 layer of fiberglass, sort of mostly just for like abrasion resistance. And yeah, she's got a fin keel and a rudder hung on a skeg. She's a sloop, but she's got a detachable inner forestay for a stay sail. I don't know. She was designed, like I said, for this man in British Columbia as sort of this independent project. She's a one-off, and she was built by Bent Jesperson, who's a wooden boat builder in just outside of Victoria, BC. So she's sort of a unique boat, but she sails well. She's designed by a real naval architect, so she works pretty well.
She looks absolutely beautiful, and for a comparatively small size, it's a credit to you for sailing here and the trips you've done. We're full of admiration. Thank you, and a great talk.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I really have full of admiration for your exploits too. So there you go.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Nick Owens has got his hand up. Nick, do you want to open your microphone and come in?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Yes, indeed. Ellen, that was absolutely a superb talk. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. I've got quite a different sort of question here, and I was interested in the sort of the ethnology of the different indigenous peoples that you talked about at the very beginning of your talk. Was there a single sort of migration into Alaska, or were there several? And so, sort of ethnically speaking, are the different peoples that you talked about, are they how closely related are they, or are they very different? Do you know? That's a fascinating aspect.
Yeah, it is really interesting. I don't know as much as I should. There were several migrations across the Bering Strait over thousands of years, and also back migrations of people back to Siberia. But I don't actually know. I mean, I know that so the people who live in the far north are not. There were, in that Point Hope area that I was talking about, there's a culture there that the archaeologists found remains of this culture that the people who live there today don't have any oral history about. So they're obviously unrelated. And then the other bit of information that I have is that the Aleut people and the Inuit and Inupiat people tend to not be very warlike. And I think that that's one reason that they were pushed out into these sort of more marginal areas, that the coastal and central people were a lot more, frankly, violent. And so basically kept the nicer areas by fighting for them. So I don't know. I mean, it's sort of all I know there, but I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much. No, it's fascinating. I'd be interested to do some follow-up work on that. That's great. Thanks a lot. It was a wonderful talk. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Next up is Gary Crothers. Gary, go ahead.
Yes, Alan, I want to thank you for the wonderful talk. The photography was, like everybody else said, is absolutely stunning. You've done a really, really good job. You put us all to shame, with our little box cameras. So they were like from the dark ages. Excellent stuff. I had two questions, but I think you've already answered one. First one was with regards to the boat. I noticed that you had runners on her, but I didn't see any staysail. So I'm just wondering, did you use your staysail very much at all?
Yeah, certainly. We use it all the time. Often, we use it more on ocean crossings than we do in coastal sailing, because it's just kind of a pain to get the jib around the inner forestay to tack, because they're pretty close together. But yeah, we use it a lot. That's sort of our primary way to shorten sail, is to have the staysail up and just roll up the jib and be using the staysail instead. But yeah, we use it all the time when we're offshore.
I guess it's just a hang-on job, is it?
Yep, that's right. Yep.
Excellent stuff. Right. The other question was, with regards to your photography, I noticed some beautiful shots of the boat when she was under sail. I presume one of you was in the dinghy, and the other person was in the boat by yourselves. And it seemed to be quite close in to glaciers and the large sticky up bits of rock. So did you have any interesting times getting those shots?
Not too bad. Yeah, I guess, but most of those shots, I think it was me in the dinghy. But yeah, no, it just didn't seem to be too bad. I mean, the glacier shots, it was all, one of the glacier shots, I was steering the boat. But yeah, it's all sort of, the glacier shots were pretty calm days. There was the one where we're going past the shore with the rocks and the waterfall. That was, I think we had a couple reefs in the main. That was kind of a windier day. But we'd been over the little stretch of water before we launched the dinghy and checked it out. So there weren't any surprises. But actually, we had the closest call we had was actually this summer in French Polynesia, and I got in the dinghy to take pictures like that. And the sun was in Seth's eyes, and he almost went full speed onto a little bommy that was a coral bommy that was poking up just a few feet under the water, but he missed it in time. So yeah.
Well, it was well worth the effort. They're brilliant shots. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Gary. We'll go first to Bob Shepton, and then I'll ask Ernie Godshawk to open his microphone. So Bob, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Ellen. Well done, very good. I was interested in your map. It seemed that you put into somewhere just south of Barrow. Why I ask is that we had a lot of trouble in Barrow, big gale, but all along that coast, it seemed very, very difficult to find anywhere where you could actually hide, right, as it is on the North Alaskan. So, but where was it that you put in, and did you find that it was a secure anchorage?
So I'm trying to think where you're thinking of, because
it was between
you're right that
and Barrow, nearer to Barrow.
Okay, because I think I'm gonna go look at my map here, because we didn't put in anywhere south of Barrow. I mean, we put in south of Point Hope. We put in Point Hope there.
Yeah.
I see what you're looking at. Okay, so we went up to Point Barrow, and then we went over to Cooper Island, and we stopped there, and that's to the east of Barrow. And then on our way back, we went straight to Nunivak Island, just straight down from Barrow.
Right. So you didn't really find any place on that Chukchi Sea on the Alaskan side?
No, the only.
Well, that's good,
The
because
only-
I didn't either, so I'm glad you didn't get one up on me.
No, all flat coast. We liked Point Hope though. That we got some
Yeah,
good protection from
we
Normandy.
spent 9 days there, gale bound, but
Yeah.
that's another story.
Yeah.
Thanks,
No,
Bob.
we wanted to go. We were looking at the chart, and there looks like there's all kinds of nice little spots you could go in Russia, but of course you can't go to Russia. So there you have it. Yeah.
You can.
Thanks, Bob.
Well, I can take this down now.
Ernie Godshook, I think your microphone is good to go.
Yes. Hi, Ellen. Fantastic. I really don't have a question. I was just putting in a plug for your article in April Cruising World called Cruising the Avian Arctic. I thought the bird lovers on the call might be interested in seeing the print article.
Yeah, that was that. Yeah, I'd forgotten that came out. That's yep, all about bird nerding up there. Yeah.
Every time I get a sailing magazine, I check to see whether you are in it, which you usually are. So thanks.
Yeah, I have fun.
You've got to make a living somehow.
No, you got to pay for the toys, the cameras and the boat and all that.
So in terms of places to haul out in Alaska, are there places in Kodiak and places?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can haul out. You can haul out in Kodiak. You can haul out in Seward, Petersburg, Juneau, Wrangell. I don't know if you can haul out in Ketchikan or not.
You can in Nome.
Nome, yeah.
Yeah. And what sort of number of boats are cruising that area in the average summer? I guess it gets fewer the further north you go, but.
Yeah. We would see 3 or 4 in Dutch Harbor in the summer. But then there's countless boats in the Inside Passage. I mean, there's so many anchorages that it's easy to get away from them, but there's a lot of boats. So there's a fair amount. I mean, like you said, yeah, it gets fewer the further north and west you go.
Yeah. Alan, time is pressing on, but it has been a fantastic evening again, and the photography was absolutely wonderful, stunning, and the video, of course, was well worth waiting for. I think I've dealt with most of the Q's and A's, but if anybody wants to put their hand up and come in at the last moment, or if any of the panelists who are still online want to come back in, then you're very welcome. But I think we've got to the end of the evening, but absolutely fantastic, great feedback on the chat line and the Q&A, wonderful talk, really enjoyed it. And I think we're going to adjust our Pacific plans when we finally do get into the Pacific and head north rather than south. But fantastic evening. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. So really you think you're gonna head up in a year or two's time, depending on whether you can haul out in Hawaii.
Yeah, it's just nuts here. It's just really not friendly to boats in Hawaii. So, so we're thinking we'll probably, ideally we want to stay here another year and spend more time seeing these islands, but we might head up as early as June or July. So yeah.
Great evening. Thank you very, very much indeed. And we'll sign off. I'll post the video up later on tonight if that's okay. And I'll send you a copy of the chat and the Q&A if you want to get back to folk. That's fine. And brilliant evening. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Oh, brilliant morning in Hawaii by the looks of things. And by the way, the picture behind you, there was some kind of snake crawling across the top of it a while ago.
Now let's see if I can take my computer. That's ooh, can you see it there? Oh no, not really. There we go. Yeah, it's a hammerhead shark. It's a top.
Yeah, no. Going across the top of the frame about 10 minutes ago, there was there was some kind of reptile or lizard or something crawling across the frame. But it was a lot.
Oh, really? It was a gecko.
It was a gecko.
Yeah.
Was it?
Oh,
okay.
yeah. No, we have so many geckos in our house. It's impossible. They're everywhere. They crawl up the walls and they eat the bugs. At least they eat the bugs, though.
The picture was a bit blurry, so I assumed it was some highly poisonous snake. I didn't want to mention it.
No, it's just a harmless little lizard.
Okay, fine. Yeah. Just like those harmless grizzlies. They all look very fine specimens. Did you? Obviously, you didn't have to use your gun. Is it legal to shoot these things if they do attack you? I mean, in Greenland, you go to prison if you do that. But it's either be eaten or go to prison.
I think there's some. I think you have to report it in some way. Yeah. Like, I think you have to tell Fish and Wildlife what happened, and I think there's sort of a really kind of involved process to determine what happened. But yeah, I mean, they don't expect you to just be killed by the grizzly and do nothing to defend yourself.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. I quite like the dog sled with the quad bike behind. It's 21st century innovation. Fantastic.
Exactly. Yeah. They're really fun to drive around too.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. Excellent, Ellen. I'm going to close down, but thank you very, very much indeed. And thank you everybody who signed up this evening. Great evening. And please sign in next week for marine pollution with Howard Dryden from Edinburgh. But wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.